Are you ready to hear a story that will give you goosebumps? If you are, hit that like button to boost your courage, share to warn your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any chilling tales from us. Now then, let the story begin.
I had learned, long before I took the private work, that every mystery carries its own weather. Some come with the chill of a morgue draw, others the sudden heat of a gun that's just been fired. The message that found me at 3:17 a.m., unsigned, unassuming, 2 sentences long, brought a pressure drop. I could feel it in my ears. Interview in Britain. Acceptance contingent on a definitive conclusion. The first line was a place. The second, a verdict handed down before trial. I answered anyway. They met me in a narrow room above a tea house that smelled of fish and bergamot. The windows were latched even though the panes wept with condensation. A man and a woman wore the wrong smiles, like people trying on expressions they'd seen in a mirror. They did not offer names. I did not ask. They offered money. I asked how many men had taken it before me. The man's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shuddered. "You are being chosen," the woman said, as if plucking me from a bowl of stones. "For what?" I asked. "To close the door," she said. They explained the rest with the haste of people telling a story that frightens them. In 1900, 3 keepers vanished from a lighthouse on an island called Eilean Mòr. Bowls of cooling stew on the table, a chair knocked over, oilskins missing from their pegs, and a log that insisted on a storm the ocean had not bothered to provide. No bodies, no boat, no answers that fixed themselves like nails in wood. A century of guesses had only made the mystery wider. The company, again no name, wanted an ending, not a possibility, a conclusion. Nothing less would be paid. I'd made a career out of endings. I had the scar tissue to prove it. A map of failures I turned into roads. I asked for the case file they'd assembled. The woman slid a folder across the table, so thin it felt insulting. Newspaper clippings. Det råndet case anen. A flimsy photocopy of the last log entry. A photograph of the island that had the washed-out exhaustion of a century-old memory. Beneath the photo, a single line they'd added in pencil. "The stone remembers." "We'll fly you to Scotland tomorrow," the man said. "You'll embed with the current crew. You'll observe." "And if there is nothing to observe?" I said. The woman glanced at the window, at the beads of water trembling along the lower sash. "There is always something," she said. "Out there. It observes you back. On the ferry." I found that pressure again. The sense of weather without wind. The mainland gave itself up to grey and then to absence. The ocean turned the color of old coins. The island revealed itself in increments. A tooth of black rock, then a dark organ of land with a lighthouse stabbed into it. The tower rose without ornament, a white bone thrust into the sky. A gull came alongside the boat, staring as if I were a fish that had spoken a rude word. The crew met me at the slip. 3 men with the practical faces of people who sleep in shifts. Macquarie, whose forearms were knotted ropes. Bliss, whose eyes looked over your shoulder even when you stood alone with him. And Dunn, small and carefully shaved. The kind of man who polished his boots to keep a promise to himself. We shook hands like negotiators dividing territory. Above us, the lighthouse lens flashed its slow heartbeat. "You'll have the spare bunk," Macquarie said. "Don't wander without telling someone." Rock breaks fast out here. Does the sea? I asked. Bliss smiled as if at a private joke. The sea doesn't break, he said. It takes. The path from the slip to the tower was a ribcage of stone slick with weed. The air tasted faintly of iron, like a coin held too long in the mouth. Wind here didn't move so much as lean. Every few paces, I had the childish certainty that the island would shrug and throw me into the water. By the time we reached the door, the lighthouse had performed a neat trick. It felt taller than it had looked from the boat, as if it had grown in the walk between us. Inside, order, brass polished, logs squared on their shelf, a clock that sounded like a throat being cleared. The lens room above purred its rotation, modest and continuous. Dunn showed me the galley and the bunk. On the table lay a chessboard with the pieces arranged mid-argument, black to move. 3 pawns made a triangle in the center, and no, I told myself, not everything is a sign. We keep to routine, Macquarie said. Routine keeps to us. What does that mean? I asked. Means we don't let the place make our rules, Bliss said, setting a kettle on the hob. We make them and keep them until we leave. You want to last out here? You learn that. And if the place wants to negotiate? I said. Dunn's laugh died as soon as it was born. Then you don't listen, he said. Not if you can help it. They put me to a task that first day. An inventory of the stores. Bags of flour, stamped with dates, tins of carrots, coils of rope, storm lanterns that still smelled faintly of the warehouse. There was relief in it. Names and numbers. Things that stacked. I hammered my mind flat against the work until the clock coughed 6 times and the kettle sighed and someone said my name with the slight disbelief that comes at the end of a long day. Detective, we ate stew. That was better than it had any right to be. The window over the sink framed a slab of evening, the texture of wet slate. Conversation limped. They asked for stories of cities, because men who live with one another at the edge of the world want to hear about crowds, as if noise could be a vitamin. I gave them an edited version of my life. The cases with edges sanded down. I did not say I sometimes saw faces in closed files, the way a child sees shapes in clouds. I did not say I'd taken this job because I'd reached the end of the ones that left me sleeping. When the wind rose, the lighthouse made a sound like a deep animal deciding to live. Bliss went up to the lens room for the night watch. Macquarie set plates one atop the other with the care of a priest stacking talismans. Dunn lingered by the stairs. I asked him where the logbooks from 1900 were kept, the originals. He didn't answer. He looked at the stairwell instead. The way people look at a dark doorway when they're trying not to. Some records went with the men, he said at last. Some went missing after, some the sea took. Didn't you hear, Bliss? That's what it does. And what does the island do? I asked. His mouth opened, then closed, as if he'd bitten a word. It keeps, he said, it keeps too well. I slept with the window latched and my shoes within reach. Sometime past midnight, I woke to the sensation that a page had been turned in a book I wasn't reading. The air had a new paragraph in it. I listened. The wind had quieted. The ocean spoke, which is to say it breathed. I closed my eyes and thought of the sentence penciled beneath the photograph in the thin file. The stone remembers. Something moved under the floor. A small settling, a shrug. Pipes, I told myself. Old buildings talk. But the movement had a shape. It began near my bunk and went away from me. Not like footsteps, more like weight reconsidering itself. A moment later, a sound, no louder than a pen drawing a line, ran along the wall and tucked itself into the corner. I lay very still and did what I have done in alleys and in interview rooms. I listened so hard that listening became the only thing I knew how to do. From somewhere below came a whisper. It did not say a word. It said my name. The first time I heard the whisper, I told myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep can coax your own thoughts into speaking voices. But when I stepped into the galley the next morning, Bliss was already there, pouring coffee with the one hand and rubbing the side of his head with the other. "Bad night?" I asked. "Just the usual," he said, not looking up. "What's the usual?" He slid the mug across the table to me. "You'll find out, or you won't. The place chooses." That set the tone for the days that followed. Half-spoken sentences, silences too loaded to be empty, and a shared habit of changing the subject when the air seemed to grow heavier. I shadowed them in their duties. Polishing brass, maintaining the lens, checking the oil. Nothing remarkable until you realized the jobs were done with a precision that felt like superstition. No shortcuts. No skipping steps. Macquarie once stopped mid-repair to unwind a rope completely and coil it again, tighter. "It listens," he said when I asked why. By the third day, I began to notice the pauses, not in their work, but in the island itself. You could be walking to the supply shed, hear the rhythmic shove of the waves against the rocks, and then nothing. Not even wind. The silence would hold for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the world would resume, as if something large had inhaled and decided not to exhale yet. It was during one of those pauses that I first heard the real voices, not the muttering of the sea or the phantom syllables you get from fatigue, but clear, deliberate speech. I was alone, logging oil levels in the storeroom. The pause came, and then, "Step outside," a voice said. Male, measured, not urgent, more like an invitation. I froze, pen halfway to the page. "Who's there?" I asked, but the question sounded small, brittle in the close air. "Outside," it said again. "He's waiting for you." When the sound of the sea returned, I stood there a long time, pretending to finish my notes. That night at dinner, I tested the waters. "Ever hear things here? Like people talking?" Macquarie grunted, whined through the walls. That's all. Bliss didn't meet my eye. "Best not to answer," he said. But Dunn's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Best not to," he echoed softer, as if to himself. "The next few nights," the voice came back. "Sometimes it told me to go to the dock. Once, it told me to look in the stone. Each time I obeyed, I found nothing but wet planks and the slow churn of the tide. But the more I listened, the more it spoke, and the less it sounded like one voice. Sometimes low and rasping, sometimes higher, almost eager. Always singular in its message. Come, see, follow. The strange thing was, the crew claimed they heard different things. Bliss mentioned voices warning him about storms that never came. Macquarie said he'd heard his late father calling from just beyond the cliff's edge. Dunn, when pressed, admitted to hearing a child laugh under the floorboards one night, though no children had set foot here in decades. "It's the island," Macquarie said, pouring himself another coffee. "It has a hunger. It tries different bait till you bite." I should have been alarmed. Instead, I found myself wanting to know what happened if you did bite. that curiosity. It didn't feel like mine. On the 6th night, the voice told me to go below. It didn't say cellar, just below. The only access was a rusted hatch in the corridor between the galley and my bunk. I'd noticed it before. Heavy chain, padlock, and a crude red X scrawled across the door in paint that had run down like blood into the cracks between boards. It was the first time I touched the lock. Cold, too cold. My thumb left a fog of warmth that vanished faster than the air could take it. I pressed my ear against the hatch. Nothing. And then, scrape. Slow, deliberate, like wood dragged across stone. I stepped back, suddenly aware that the corridor was narrower than usual. The walls leaning in. A smell crept up through the hatch. Metallic and sweet, like rusted sugar. I went to get the crew, but when I found them in the lens room, they stood too still, their faces turned toward the glass. "Something's down there," I said. They didn't look at me. Bliss's lips moved, almost imperceptibly. "Don't let it know your name." The wind rose, pressing its shoulder against the tower, and they all blinked as though waking from a nap. "What's that?" McCary asked, and the moment was gone. The next morning, the hatch was gone. Not locked. Gone. In its place, the corridor floor was seamless, as if no door had ever been there. When I asked about it over breakfast, McCary just frowned. "What hatch?" Bliss stirred his tea without looking up. "Eat your eggs," he said. But Dunn across from me mouthed one word without sound. "Tonight." That night I lay awake, boots on, waiting. When the silence came, the 3-heartbeat pause, I heard it again. The voice. Not from below this time, but from the wall beside my bunk. "Hungry," it said, and for the first time, I believed it. "If you approve, I'll move on to part 3, the red X, where the cellar door returns and we dive into the most disturbing discovery so far. Would you like me to proceed?" The hatch returned 3 days later. I woke to the sound of chains shifting, slow, lazy metal, like someone uncoiling a leash. My boots were already on. The corridor was darker than it should have been, as if the tower had swallowed the moonlight whole. The hatch lay in its place again, the chain loose, the padlock open and hanging by a single loop. The red X looked fresh, wet. The paint glistened as though it had been laid down seconds ago. But when I touched it, it was cold and dry. There's a point in an investigation where you stop asking if something makes sense and start asking if you can survive knowing the answer. I knelt, slipped the chain aside, and lifted the hatch. The hinges didn't squeal. They inhaled, as though relieved. Stairs descended into a square of black. The smell rose to meet me. Damp limestone, rot, and that same metallic sweetness I'd caught before. It filled my mouth like a taste. My phone's flashlight barely dented the dark. The steps were narrower than they should have been, the angle steep enough to make my knees ache. The stone sweated. Beads of moisture slid over my knuckles as I touched the wall to steady myself. At the bottom, a room. Cement walls slicker skin. Wooden floorboards warped with moisture. One object in the center, a chair. Not a work chair, not something functional. It was the kind of chair you'd find in a childhood kitchen, meant for sitting in, waiting. The walls were mostly bare, except for one sentence that scrawled in red along the far side. "I didn't do it. He made me." The paint here was wet. My light caught the smear where a finger had dragged through the words, distorting the "he" into a shape like antlers. I turned, half expecting someone behind me, but the stairs were empty. Only the sound of the ocean, muffled, distant, like hearing it from inside another body. "Detective." The voice came from the chair, not above it, not behind. It came out of it, from under the grain of the wood. Low, conversational, like the first syllable of a confession. "Detective, sit." The air thickened. Not hotter, not colder, thicker, as though every breath had to be chewed before swallowing. I stepped back until my heel hit the wall. The voice didn't repeat itself, but it didn't fade either. It waited. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time. The hatch slammed shut without me touching it. By the time I reached my bunk, the sound had stopped. But my clothes smelled like the cellar. Rot and iron. At dinner that night, I didn't plan to mention it. But the moment Macari passed me the bread, I heard myself say, I went below. All 3 stopped chewing. Bliss was the first to speak. "You shouldn't have." "It's part of the job," I said. Macari's face hardened. No job's worth going in there. Dunn set his fork down carefully, like it might shatter. "What did you see?" I told them, left nothing out. When I mentioned the sentence on the wall, their expressions didn't change, but they all exchanged the same glance, quick as a flicker, as if passing something between them without moving their mouths. "That message," I said, "who wrote it?" "We don't know," Bliss said too quickly. "You've all been down there," I pressed. They didn't deny it. Macari's voice went quieter. "We wake there every 2 weeks or so. Cuts on our arms, knife in the middle, always the same shape, triangle." "What kind of triangle?" Bliss reached for the salt shaker, drew 3 small dots on the table with his fingertip, then connected them with an invisible line. Pointed toward the chair. "Who's he?" I asked. Silence. "Is it the same voice?" Dunn nodded, almost imperceptibly. Bliss leaned forward. "Once you've been down there, it knows you. And it waits. That's why you don't go unless you're taken." I wanted to push for more, but Macari's eyes had gone flat. The conversation over. That night, I dreamed I was back in the cellar. The chair faced me, though I was standing in the doorway. Something sat in it, but every time I tried to see, the shape blurred, not from fog or shadow, but because my eyes wouldn't let me. Like they'd been told, firmly, "Don't look." The voice came again, closer this time. "Triangle holds, triangle feeds." When I woke, there was a fresh cut along my forearm, 3 inches, shallow, but deliberate. I checked the corridor. The hatch was gone again. If you're ready, the next section, part 4. 48 minutes will take us into the first full possession episode, where 2 missing days feel like less than an hour, and the crew's black-eyed chanting begins. Do you want me to go on? The cut on my arm wasn't the worst part. It was the way the skin around it seemed reluctant to heal, as though the flesh was listening for permission. I wrapped it tight and told myself I'd wait for the next 2-week cycle the crew had described. I didn't have to wait that long. It began on a Sunday morning. I remember the day because Macari had muttered something about God's Day, which was the first time I'd heard him mention anything remotely spiritual. The air had a weight to it, different from the usual pressure. The island sometimes felt like it was leaning over your shoulder. This was more like it had its hand on the back of your neck. I was in the galley, halfway through coffee, when the silence came. The 3 heartbeat pause. But this time, it didn't let go. Everything froze. The kettle on the stove no longer hissed. The pendulum in the wall clock hung in mid-swing. Even the light through the window seemed pinned in place. A single golden bar on the table that didn't shift as clouds moved. "Detective?" I didn't look toward the voice. I'd learned by now that eye contact was an invitation. "Come below." My body obeyed before I could argue. My legs carried me down the corridor, past the place where the hatch usually appeared. Only now it was there, chain dangling open. The red expulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of something painted alive. The steps down felt shorter this time. And then, wrong. Instead of the cellar, I was in the lens room at the top of the tower. Only it wasn't lit. The Great Fresnel lens was still, the prisms dull. The windows looked out not on ocean, but on shifting dark, like staring into a tunnel that moved. Behind me, breathing. When I turned, the crew stood shoulder to shoulder. Bliss in the middle, Macquarie and Dunn flanking. Their faces were drained of color, and their eyes, no whites, no pupils, just black, glossy, too large for their sockets. They began to walk toward me in unison. Their mouths didn't move, but the sound came all the same, low, rhythmic. A chant that tasted like metal in my mouth. "He's gonna get you. He's gonna get you." I backed into the cold lens. It hummed faintly against my spine. My chest was tight, the air syrup thick. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt heavier than bone. The crew's movement slowed, but the chant quickened. The words smearing together into something like a growl. The lens behind me warmed, not with heat, but with a vibration, as though the glass was purring. The edges of my vision darkened, collapsing inward. I remember one more thing before it all went. Dunn's head tilted, his neck bending too far, vertebrae flexing like wet rope. His mouth didn't open, but somehow I knew he was smiling. Then nothing. When I woke, it was to cold water splashing my face. I was lying on the galley floor. My clothes were damp and stiff with salt. Macquarie, Bliss, and Dunn crouched over me, looking normal again. Almost too normal. Like actors who'd scrubbed off stage makeup but hadn't quite shed the role. "You were out cold?" Macquarie said, his voice careful. "For how long?" My throat was sandpaper. Bliss glanced at the clock. "It's Tuesday, 4 in the afternoon. 2 days, 48 hours erased." My body felt like I'd only been gone minutes. "You didn't try to wake me?" I asked. "We tried," Dunn said. "Door wouldn't open." "What door?" "The hatch," Macquarie said. "Once it shuts, it won't budge. Doesn't matter if you take a sledge to it. And we heard you." "Heard me what?" Bliss wouldn't meet my eyes. "Screaming. Not words. Just something you shouldn't be able to make with your throat." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Like the sound hadn't just been inhuman, but owned. I tried to stand. My knees buckled. My arms ached. And when I rolled up my sleeves, I saw new cuts, dozens of them, up both forearms, shallow, but all perfectly straight, as if measured. "Triangle?" I asked. Macquarie nodded once. No one spoke the rest of the day. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I realized something else. My Bible, the one I'd kept in the drawer, was gone. I'd never opened it here, but I knew exactly where it had been. Now the drawer was empty, except for a faint smear of red across the wood, paint maybe, or something wetter. The wind outside shifted, bringing with it a sound I'd only heard once before. deep under the floorboards. A scrape, long, patient, closer this time. I didn't sleep. Triangles began to appear everywhere after the 48 minutes. Not just in the cellar, everywhere. On the second morning back to normal, I found 3 mugs left out on the galley counter, each at a point of an equilateral triangle. When I pointed it out to Bliss, he glanced at them, shrugged, and broke the pattern with one casual move. But not before I noticed his hand tremble slightly. Later, in the supply shed, I saw 3 coils of rope hung from the rafters, their loops forming the same geometry. The third coil was thicker than the others, its fibers dark with something that wasn't seawater. I began sketching them in my notebook. Angles, distances, placement. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but I was looking for a message. Patterns like this didn't happen by accident. Macquarie caught me one afternoon, crouched in the corridor, measuring the distance between 3 rust stains on the wall. "You're not gonna figure it out," he said. "It's not math. It's appetite." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It's how it feeds," he replied, and walked away before I could press him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The Bible's absence gnawed at me in a way I hadn't expected. Like a missing tooth you keep prodding with your tongue. At some point, I gave up on rest and went down to the dock. The tide was low, the sea pulling away from the island's edge like a blanket stripped from a bed. That's when I saw it. The rocks at the base of the cliff were bare for the first time since I'd arrived. And on those rocks, thick hemp rope, 3 lengths, lay knotted together in a shape unmistakable even from 20 feet above. A triangle, its apex pointing back toward the lighthouse. The knots were old, green-black with algae, but tight, deliberate, as if whatever had tied them wanted them to last longer than the rope itself. The next day, I went to the records room, a cramped alcove with logs and charts going back decades. Dunn had told me most of the original 1900 materials were missing, taken by the sea, but there were still enough papers to sift through. The handwriting changed over the years, but certain entries repeated. Always vague, always brushed aside as local superstition by whatever inspector had initialed the page. Phrases like, "formed again last night," "voices stronger in the angles," "3 keeps the door." I found one entry, undated, written in a cramped, almost frantic scrawl. "We are the shape when we sleep. He wears it. He eats in it." The cellar came back to mind. The 3 of them, lying on the floor, cuts on their wrists, forming a triangle with the knife at the center. I thought of my own arms, the shallow lines, the pattern I hadn't noticed until now. The cuts formed angles, 2 on one arm, 1 on the other, points. I copied the entries, folded them into my coat. That night at dinner, I brought them up. Macquarie set down his spoon. "You shouldn't have gone digging." "Then tell me what it means," I said. "What's the triangle for?" "It's not for anything," Bliss said. "It's of something." "Of what?" Dunn met my eyes. "Of him." That was all they'd give me. The rest of the meal passed in silence, except for the wind whirring the shutters. Over the next few days, I started seeing changes in the crew. Macquarie would pause mid-sentence, staring into a corner as though waiting for it to blink. Bliss began pacing at night, bare feet whispering against the floorboards in measured steps. Always 3 in one direction, 3 back. Dunn hummed tunelessly under his breath, 3 notes over and over until I snapped at him and he stopped, eyes wide, like he just realized he was making noise. The island itself seemed to join in. Girls began circling in threes. Their cries staggered. Waves hit the rocks in triplets. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Even the lens at the top of the tower flashed in a rhythm I hadn't noticed before. 3 slow revolutions. A pause. Repeat. One evening, I traced all the triangles I'd sketched onto a single sheet of paper, aligning them so that their apexes met. The lines formed something uncomfortably close to a symbol. A jagged, many-pointed star with a hollow center. I stared at it too long, my eyes watering, until I realized I wasn't blinking. When I finally looked away, the room seemed to tilt. The floorboards swelled upward, as if the wood had taken a breath. The smell of the cellar leaked into the air. Damp stone and sweet rot. Somewhere deep in the tower, a scrape answered. The next time the silence came, I counted my heartbeats. 3, exactly. And then the voice, "Come below." I didn't move. "Bring the others." The ship came into view just after dawn. Its low hull cutting the pale horizon, its engine droning through the stone. Relief should have been the natural reaction. It wasn't. The closer it came, the more the island seemed to tighten its grip, as if it knew something was about to be taken from it. We didn't speak much that morning. Macquarie oiled the winch. Bliss checked the log one last time. Dunn scrubbed the galley table until the wood was damp and raw. They worked with the same expression people have at funerals. Ritual without belief. I packed slowly. Clothes, notebook, the folded records from the alcove. I reached for the Bible in my nightstand drawer. Habit more than need, and froze. It wasn't there. I emptied the drawer, checked the floor, my bunk. Nothing. The Bible wasn't the kind of thing you misplace. It had sat in that drawer since my first night here, untouched but constant. "You see a book in here?" I asked Dunn as he passed my door. "What kind of book?" "Black cover, worn edges, Bible." He paused, brow furrowing in a way that looked rehearsed. "Can't say I have." I asked Macquarie and Bliss in turn. Both shook their heads without hesitation, but both also avoided my eyes. The ship's horn cut off further questions. We filed down the slick path to the slip. The wind had dropped entirely. The ocean holding its breath as the vessel eased into place. The new crew disembarked, 3 men, strangers, carrying duffels, and the kind of wide-eyed look you see on the first day of a long sentence. Greetings were curt. The handover was brief. I wondered if anyone had warned them about the triangles, the cellar, the voices. I doubted it. On the deck of the departing ship, I turned for one last look at the lighthouse. From here, it seemed smaller, harmless even, just a white spine against black stone. But the windows were too dark, and in the highest one, the lens room, I thought I saw movement. 3 shapes standing side by side watching. The further we got from the island, the lighter my chest felt. The air tasted clean, like it had been rinsed. By the time the mainland appeared, the tension in my shoulders had eased for the first time in weeks. That's when I made the mistake of asking, "Do we talk about it now?" I said to Macquarie, Bliss, and Dunn. "Or keep it between us?" They looked at me as though I'd asked about a shared dream they'd never had. "Talk about what?" Bliss said. "The cellar, the voices, the thing that happens." Blank stares. "Come on," I said. "Don't start this." Macquarie raised an eyebrow. "You might have gone a bit stir-crazy, detective." happens out there sometimes. Nothing to be ashamed of." "No shame," Dunn added. "Just don't take the place too seriously. It's only a rock with a light on it." They weren't joking, or if they were, they'd become perfect at it. I tried jogging their memories, describing the cuts, the black eyes, the triangle. But they just smiled politely, like humoring a drunk. By the time we docked in Scotland, my anger had cooled into unease. When I asked for their contact information, Macari shook his head. "We don't mix business and personal," he said. "Safer that way." They left in separate directions. Swallowed by the crowd, I sat on a bench by the pier, flipping through my notebook. Every detail was there. Dates, times, sketches of the triangles, transcriptions of log entries. I wasn't imagining it, but I was suddenly aware that I had no proof beyond my own hand. The cuts on my arms had faded to pale lines overnight, thin enough to be mistaken for scratches. And the Bible, still missing. That's when it hit me. The red X in the cellar, the 3 points, the rope knots pointing toward the tower. It was always about containment. Not keeping something out, but keeping something in. And the Bible, the one object explicitly marked with God's name, had been taken from me, not misplaced, removed. By what? By who? The voice in the cellar had called itself He, without saying it. The log from 1900 had ended with "God is over all." A statement or a warning. If you invert it, it reads like a threat. Something else is under everything. What if He was the opposite of that? Something that fed on geometry and silence, that worked its will through patterns and absence. Something that needed the Bible gone because it was the only piece on the board it couldn't move. The ship's horn startled me out of my thoughts. I looked back toward the sea. The island was no longer visible. But I swear the water between here and there looked darker, as though something large and patient was drifting just beneath the surface. Back in my flat, the silence was different. It was mine again. Domestic, shallow, the kind that breaks with the hum of a fridge or the shiver of pipes. And yet, in the hours after my return, I kept catching that other kind of silence. The one with weight. The 3 heartbeat hold. The first time it happened here, I dropped the kettle. The second time, I spoke into it. "You can't follow me." No answer. But I didn't believe the quiet. I spent the first week transcribing my notes, cross-referencing the log entries I'd copied from the records room. The triangles formed in the cellar matched the rope formations at low tide. Those matched stains on the lighthouse wall from decades past. The geometry repeated through the years. Through storms, both real and fabricated. Because I finally understood the storm from the 1900 log. The keepers had described a tempest like no other, but no weather had been recorded in that region. It wasn't a lie. They had seen it. But it wasn't in the sky. The storm had been inside the lighthouse. Something had closed them in and remade the world until they broke. Something that could bend time and memory the way a sailor knots rope, pulling some threads taut, letting others drift loose. And the missing Bible. That part took longer to face. I'd brought it without thinking, more habit than faith, but I remembered placing it in the drawer that first night. I'd felt its weight there every day, even when I didn't touch it. On the day we left, it was gone, and the crew acted like it had never existed. I checked the photographs I'd taken of my bunk on arrival. There it was, black cover against the pale wood. Proof, if he could remove that without opening the drawer, what else could be taken from me without my knowing? I wrote my report for the company exactly as I remembered it. No embellishments, no metaphors, dates, events, direct quotes. I sent it in, half expecting them to reject it out of hand. Instead, they thanked me for my thoroughness and said they would verify certain aspects before publication. I don't know how they think they can verify that, but as I finished the report, I kept circling one phrase. The last entry in the 1900 log. God is over all. Was it faith, a prayer, a warning? Or was it written by someone who'd seen him and realized that the only hope lay in something greater, above the island, above the geometry, above the hunger? Because the inverse is too simple. If God is over all, then something else is under everything, waiting, reaching up through cracks in the stone. The last night before sending the report, I dreamed I was back in the cellar. The chair faced me again. This time, there was no blur, no refusal of sight. Something sat in it, tall and narrow, like a figure stretched out of shape, skin pale as ash, eyes deep and black, but burning at the edges with a red eye felt into my teeth. Its hands rested on its knees, fingers too long, each ending in a black curve like a hook. When it spoke, its voice wasn't a sound. It was the memory of a sound, something I was sure I'd heard before I was born. You carried my mark away, it said. I looked down. The cuts on my arms glowed faintly. Lines connecting, closing into a perfect triangle. You will open the door, it said. I woke gasping. My flat was dark, except for the streetlight bleeding through the blinds. But I could smell the cellar. Damp stone and rusted sugar. I threw the sheets back and checked my arms. The cuts were gone. Not healed. Gone, as though they'd never been there. For the first time since I left the island, I felt the pressure lift completely. That's when I realized, whatever it wanted, it didn't need to follow me. It needed me to go back. The company says they'll publish my findings in a few months. They'll attach my name, my credentials. Maybe I'll be called a fraud. Maybe a lunatic. That's fine. If someone reads it and decides never to step foot on Eilean Mòr, then it will have been worth it. But I know how stories work. Curiosity is stronger than fear. The report will bring people closer, not drive them away. And the stone remembers if you go there and you see the red X, don't open it. Don't listen if it says your name. And if you wake in the shape of a triangle, don't move. Because if God is over all, then what's under everything is patient, and He's gonna get you.